Elias Vance had never thought much about his standard issue thermal blanket. It was just another piece of equipment at Epsilon Station, functional, ordinary, unremarkable. Like everything else on this dust-swept lunar outpost, it existed simply to keep him alive in an environment that seemed determined to kill him. So when he draped it over the shivering alien woman he'd found half buried in the regolith, he expected nothing more than basic gratitude, if that. He certainly didn't expect her to cradle it like a newborn, to stroke its synthetic fibers with reverence, to press it against her face and emit that haunting melodic sound that made the hairs on his arms stand up. And he definitely didn't expect her to touch her forehead to his, flooding his mind with a single, overwhelming concept. Sacred. But then again, Elias hadn't expected anything about this day to go the way it had. The morning had begun like all the others at Epsilon Station, with the coffee machine's particularly aggressive gurgling. Elias often wondered if the engineers had programmed personality quirks into the station systems to give lonely technicians something to interact with, or if isolation just made people attribute personalities to machines. Either way, the coffee machine was definitely passive-aggressive. "Yes, I know," Elias muttered as he shuffled across the cramped common area. "I'll clean your filter later." Beyond the small, reinforced windows, the lunar landscape stretched out in monotonous grays. The horizon curved sharply away, a constant reminder of just how small and round this world was. Dust devils spiraled across the surface, driven by thermal differentials rather than actual weather. The view never changed, except during dust storms when there was no view at all. Epsilon Station wasn't important enough to warrant more than one permanent resident. It existed primarily to monitor seismic activity and test various life support systems that might eventually be implemented in larger lunar colonies. Elias was 3 months into his 1-year posting, and the novelty had worn off after approximately 2 weeks. He sipped his coffee and winced. The water recycler was giving the coffee that metallic aftertaste again. He'd have to recalibrate it, add it to the endless list of maintenance tasks that defined his existence here. The air filtration system had been making an ominous rattling sound for days now. The hydroponics bay was showing signs of a potential algae imbalance, and the external sensor array needed a dust cleaning after last week's storm. "Mission Control, this is Epsilon Station checking in with daily status report," he said, not bothering to sit up straight for the video feed. No one was watching in real time anyway. All systems functioning within acceptable parameters. A small lie, but an expected one. Unless something was catastrophically wrong, Epsilon's problems were Elias's problems to solve. Hydroponic yields are consistent with projections. Water reclamation at 93% efficiency, down 2% from yesterday, but still within operational norms. Seismic monitors have recorded no significant activity, no anomalies to report. He was about to continue with the atmospheric readings when a soft alert pinged from the monitoring station. Elias frowned, tapping the notification to expand it. An energy signature, unidentified, had registered on the short-range sensors. It wasn't solar radiation or any of the usual cosmic background noise. The pattern was structured, almost rhythmic, and it was moving. Specifically, it was descending. Elias's heart rate quickened as he expanded the sensor feed. The protocol for unidentified phenomena was clear. Report immediately. Maintain observation from a safe distance. Do not approach or engage. But as he watched the energy signature's trajectory, another alert sounded. Impact detected, approximately 3 kilometers from the station. He hesitated, hand hovering over the emergency communication button. Whatever it was had already landed. It could be a meteorite with an unusual composition. It could be debris from one of the many satellites or probes that humans had scattered throughout the solar system. It could be something else entirely. The rational part of Elias's brain, the part that had gotten him through graduate school and the rigorous psychological screening for isolated postings, told him to follow protocol. The other part, the part that had been slowly suffocating under the weight of routine and solitude, whispered that this might be the only interesting thing to happen during his entire year at Epsilon. "Control, I'm detecting some unusual readings that require investigation," he said, choosing his words carefully. I'll suit up and perform a short reconnaissance. We'll update with findings." He ended the transmission before anyone could respond with cautionary instructions. It would be hours before they received his message. Anyway, 20 minutes later, Elias was guiding the small rover across the lunar surface, helmet filled with the sound of his own breathing and the occasional static burst from the station's comms. The impact site wasn't difficult to find, a fresh scar in the ancient regolith, the dust still settling in the weak gravity. What he hadn't expected was the clear shape of a craft. It was small, perhaps the size of one of Earth's atmospheric shuttles, but its design was like nothing Elias had ever seen. No hard angles or utilitarian protrusions, just smooth, flowing lines that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light. One section was clearly damaged, a jagged tear revealing glimpses of an interior filled with what looked like crystalline structures. But it was the figure slumped beside the craft that made Elias stop breathing for several seconds. Humanoid, but wrong in subtle ways that his brain struggled to categorize. Too tall and slender, joints that bent at slightly different angles, skin that shimmered with an iridescence that couldn't be explained by the harsh lunar light. And when the figure turned toward the approaching rover, Elias saw eyes, 3 of them, arranged in a triangular pattern, that were entirely black except for pinpricks of white light that seemed to pulse gently. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Then the figure attempted to stand and immediately crumpled back to the ground. Protocol screamed in Elias's mind. This was beyond unusual readings. This was a first contact scenario. There were entire departments at command dedicated to this possibility, teams of xenobiologists and diplomatic specialists and security experts who had trained for years for this exact situation. And here he was, alone, watching this being struggle to rise again, movements growing more desperate. Before he could second-guess himself, Elias was out of the rover, moving in the awkward lunar hop toward the fallen figure. Up close, he could see what looked like a suit of some kind, torn in places to reveal the iridescent skin beneath. One limb was clutched protectively against its body, and a clear fluid leaked slowly from a gash along what Elias assumed was its rib cage. Inoshi, he somehow knew, looked up at him, those strange eyes widening. She made no move to retreat, but Elias saw what might have been fear in the way her body tensed. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, knowing she couldn't hear him through his helmet, but hoping his body language conveyed his intentions. He extended a hand slowly, palm up. After a hesitation, she reached out, her hand having 2 opposable digits on either side of the palm, where humans had only one thumb. The touch sent a mild electric tingle up Elias's arm, and for just a second, he thought he felt a whisper of something, confusion, pain, relief, brush against his consciousness. Getting her into the rover was awkward. She was lighter than her height would suggest, but the reduced gravity made every movement an exercise in careful control. Her body temperature seemed dangerously low through his gloves, and she was trembling constantly. The journey back to Epsilon Station passed in surreal silence. Elias's mind raced through implications and consequences, protocols violated and potential repercussions, but always circling back to the immediate reality. An injured, non-human intelligence that needed help, and no one but him to provide it. The airlock cycle seemed to take forever. As the pressure equalized, Elias removed his helmet and watched anxiously as his passenger took her first breath of the station's atmosphere. She inhaled sharply, then began breathing more normally, though each breath seemed deliberate, as if she was having to consciously adapt to the composition of the air. "Can you understand me?" he asked as he helped her from the rover into the station proper. She made no response beyond watching him with those strange eyes, pupils contracting in the station's brighter light. The medical bay was little more than an alcove with basic equipment, designed for a single human occupant who might need to treat minor injuries or illness. Elias had no idea if any of the treatments or medications would help her, or might harm her, so he focused on the universal basics. Cleaning the visible wound, she flinched but didn't pull away, providing water, which she sniffed cautiously before drinking with obvious relief and warmth. She was still trembling, whether from cold, shock, or something else entirely. Elias rummaged through a storage compartment and pulled out his spare thermal blanket. Basic station issue, silver on one side to reflect heat, soft synthetic fiber on the other for comfort. He shook it out and draped it around her shoulders. Her reaction was immediate and bewildering. She froze, three eyes widening until they were perfect circles. Slowly, reverently, she reached up to touch the blanket, fingers tracing the simple stitching with the delicacy of someone handling a priceless artifact. A sound emerged from her, musical, almost like wind chimes, rising and falling in complex patterns. Then she clutched the blanket tight around herself and stood, moving toward Elias with a fluid grace that made him step back instinctively. Before he could react further, she reached out and placed her palm against his forehead. The world exploded into sensation. It wasn't exactly like seeing images or hearing words. It was more fundamental than that, as if concepts were being written directly into his consciousness. Overwhelming gratitude, profound reverence, and a single clear impression that translated in his mind as sacred gift or blessed offering or divine conductor. The exact translation seemed to shift and refine itself as his brain struggled to interpret. When she pulled her hand away, Elias found himself sitting on the floor, not remembering how he got there. She knelt beside him, the blanket still wrapped tightly around her shoulders, watching him with what he now recognized as concern. "You're welcome," he managed to say, his voice sounding distant to his own ears. "It's just a blanket. Standard issue." She tilted her head, obviously not understanding his words, but seeming to recognize his confusion. She touched the blanket again and then touched her chest, where Elias could now see a complex pattern beneath the iridescent skin, like circuitry or perhaps a vascular system unlike anything human. "I'm Elias," he said, pointing to himself. Elias Vance. She considered this, then placed her hand over her own chest. "Awaya," she said, the sound somewhere between speech and song. "Lyra," Elias repeated, the name feeling right somehow. "Welcome to Epsilon Station. I have absolutely no idea what I'm supposed to do with you." The first 24 hours with Lyra were a masterclass in creative communication and mutual bewilderment. Elias tried everything he could think of, drawing pictures, pantomiming actions, showing instructional videos from the station's database, using simple words repeated often. Lyra was an eager student, but an alien one, sometimes grasping concepts instantly and other times completely missing what seemed to Elias the most obvious interpretations. For her part, Lyra approached the station and its contents with a mix of intense curiosity and inexplicable reverence. She would touch ordinary objects, a coffee mug, a datapad, the edge of a desk, with the same delicacy she had shown the blanket, though with less overt awe. Sometimes she would close her eyes and simply hold an object, as if listening to it or feeling something Elias couldn't perceive. "It's just a stylus," he said once, when she spent several minutes examining the simple writing implement, running her long fingers along its length again and again. "It's not even a good one. The tip sticks sometimes." Lyra looked up at him, then deliberately placed the stylus against a notepad where Elias had been trying to create a simplified pictorial language they could share. She traced a pattern, not writing as he understood it, but a complex spiral of interconnected lines. When she finished, she handed him the stylus and guided his hand to trace the same pattern. As his fingers followed the lines, Elias felt a strange resonance, almost like the hum of machinery, but felt rather than heard. When he finished tracing the pattern, the sensation faded. "What was that?" he asked, knowing she wouldn't understand the words, but hoping his tone conveyed the question. Lyra took his hand and placed it flat on the notepad, then laid her hand beside his. She traced another pattern in the air above their hands, and Elias felt that same resonance again, stronger this time, a vibration that seemed to connect his hand to hers, the notepad to both of them, and somehow to the station around them. Some kind of energy manipulation, he guessed. Or maybe just static electricity, and I'm going crazy from isolation. Lyra just smiled. At least, He interpreted the subtle movement of her facial features as a smile, and went back to examining the stylus. The thermal blanket, however, remained in a category all its own. When not wrapped around her shoulders, Lyra kept it carefully folded beside her. Periodically, she would unfold it and run her hands across its surface, sometimes humming or singing quietly to it. Twice, Elias caught her placing it over various station equipment. Once on the temperamental coffee machine, once on the environmental control panel that had been giving him trouble for weeks. "I don't think that's going to help," he said the second time, gently moving to take the blanket from the controls. "If anything, it might cause a short if condensation builds up." Lyra made a sound that Elias had come to recognize as disagreement and gestured for him to wait. She placed her hands on the blanket where it draped over the controls, closed her three eyes, and began to emit a low, thrumming tone. The sound seemed to resonate with the station itself, harmonizing with the background hum of equipment until Elias could no longer distinguish between them. After about a minute, she removed the blanket, carefully folded it, and nodded to Elias with what looked like satisfaction. To his astonishment, the environmental controls, which had been stuck in a cycle of minor but irritating temperature fluctuations for days, now showed a perfectly stable reading. When he checked the actual temperature sensors around the station, they confirmed the stability. "That's not possible," he said, running a diagnostic check that came back clear. "What did you do?" Lyra pointed to the blanket, then to Elias, then made a flowing gesture between them and the control panel, ending with her hands pressed together and then expanding outward like a flower blooming. "Right," Elias said, clear as mud. But over the next few days, Elias couldn't ignore the mounting evidence that something strange was happening. The water recycler's efficiency improved, eliminating the metallic taste from his coffee. The ominous rattle in the air filtration system disappeared completely. Most dramatically, the small experimental plants in the hydroponics bay, which had been struggling to thrive for months despite Elias's best efforts, suddenly flourished, producing more oxygen and growing visibly faster than their programmed rate. Each improvement coincided with Lyra spending time near the equipment, often with the thermal blanket, singing or humming those resonant tones. Elias found himself torn between scientific skepticism and the undeniable results before his eyes. "It's probably just coincidence," he told himself as he recorded yet another anomalous growth rate in the hydroponics log. "Or maybe I've been neglecting maintenance more than I realized, and she's just happening to interact with systems right after they self-correct." But he didn't really believe that, especially after the morning he woke to find Lyra sitting cross-legged in the center of the common area. The thermal blanket spread beneath her, creating what looked like a detailed model of the star's system, using small objects she'd gathered from around the station. Nuts and bolts, data chips, pieces of dried food, all arranged in intricate patterns. As Elias watched, she manipulated the objects, establishing connections between them with strands of thread she'd somehow extracted from the blanket's edge. Each time she connected two objects, she would produce one of her musical tones, and Elias would feel that now familiar resonance washing through the room. She looked up, sensing his presence, and beckoned him to join her. When he sat across from her, she took his hands and placed them on two of the objects, a bolt and what looked like a dried blueberry from his breakfast rations. As soon as he touched them, the resonance intensified, and images bloomed in his mind. Stars, countless stars, connected by webs of light. Beings like Lyra moving between them on currents of energy. And through it all, a sense of harmony, of balance, of connection so profound it brought tears to his eyes. Then discord, a catastrophic disruption in the web of light, connections shattering, beings crying out as they were flung into darkness, isolation replacing harmony. The images shifted to show scattered individuals like Lyra, searching, each carrying a small fragment of light, seeking others to reconnect with. When the vision faded, Elias found Lyra watching him intently, her three eyes focused on his face. "Your people," he said, understanding dawning. "You're trying to find them again." She picked up the thermal blanket, held it between them, then pointed to Elias, making that now familiar bloom gesture with her hands. The blanket, Am I giving it to you? That matters to your people. Lyra nodded emphatically, then placed her palm against his forehead again. This time, the concepts were clearer, as if his brain had learned to interpret her method of communication better. The Kthar, her people, once united by a resonance network that connected their consciousness across vast distances. A catastrophic event, war or natural disaster, Elias couldn't quite grasp which, had shattered that network, scattering the survivors. Now, they wandered the cosmos, seeking sparks of unconditional kindness that could serve as anchoring points to rebuild and reconnect the fragments of their network. Elias's simple act of giving, the thermal blanket offered without expectation of return to a stranger in need, had created such an anchoring point, a conduit that amplified the resonance of kindness. The blanket itself was nothing special, but the act of giving it had transformed it into something the Kthar revered. When Lyra removed her hand, Elias sat in silence for several minutes, processing the enormity of what she'd shared. His insignificant gesture, made out of basic human decency, had somehow become a beacon for an ancient alien civilization trying to rebuild itself. No pressure, he muttered finally. The long-range sensors pinged while they were sharing a meal. Elias with his reconstituted pasta, Lyra with synthesized protein that she seemed to find palatable after adding some kind of crystalline substance from a small pouch she carried. The alarm wasn't urgent, just notifying Elias of unusual energy patterns detected at the edge of the station's monitoring range. He excused himself to check the readings, frowning as he analyzed the data. The energy signature was similar to what he detected when Lyra's craft had descended, but more diffuse, like a cloud rather than a defined object. And it seemed to be pulsing? Yes, emitting regular waves of energy that spread outward before contracting again. Most concerning was that the pulses appeared to be focused on Epsilon Station itself, as if the source was specifically directing energy toward them. Lyra, he called, I think you should see this. She joined him at the monitoring station, her expression changing as she saw the readouts. She made a sound Elias hadn't heard before, higher-pitched, with a rapid modulation that somehow conveyed both excitement and anxiety. Do you know what that is? He asked, pointing to the energy signature. Lyra placed her hand on the screen, tracing the pattern of pulses. She looked at Elias, then pointed upward, then to herself, then made a gesture like gathering something toward her chest. Your people, Elias guessed. They found you. She nodded, but her expression remained complex. Hope mingled with what looked like apprehension. She retrieved the thermal blanket from where she'd left it folded on a nearby chair and draped it over her shoulders, clutching it tight as she stared at the sensor readings. Elias checked the station logs, confirming that similar energy signatures have been appearing intermittently over the past days, growing stronger each time. They were especially powerful during periods when Lyra had been interacting with the thermal blanket or emitting her resonant tones. They're responding to the whatever it is you've been doing, he said, a cold weight settling in his stomach as a new alert appeared on his communication panel. It was an encrypted message from Xena Command, the division responsible for monitoring potential extraterrestrial activity. The decryption took only seconds with his command codes. Level 3 unidentified energy fluctuations detected at Epsilon Station. Suspected non-terrestrial biological origin. Maintain observation. Do not engage. Detailed report required. Assessment team, ETA, 72 hours. Elias read the message twice, the implications sinking in. Xena Command had detected the energy signatures from Earth, or more likely from one of their monitoring satellites in the outer system. They were sending a team to investigate, and they already suspected a non-terrestrial biological origin. He looked at Lyra, who was watching him with evident concern. We have a problem, he said. My people have noticed the energy signatures, too. They're sending a team to investigate. They'll be here in 3 days. Lyra tilted her head, clearly not understanding all his words but picking up on his tone. She placed her hand on his arm, sending a questioning feeling. Xena Command. Elias tried to explain, pulling up the organization's logo on his screen. a stylized X superimposed over a field of stars. They're responsible for dealing with beings like you. First contact scenarios. He hesitated, not sure how to convey the complexity of the situation. Command wasn't necessarily hostile to the idea of extraterrestrial intelligence. In fact, many in the organization had devoted their careers to finding evidence of it. But they were also deeply cautious, prioritizing human security above all else. Standard protocol for an unplanned contact scenario like this would involve isolation of a non-terrestrial entity, containment of all potentially alien technology or artifacts, and extensive testing and interrogation before any consideration of broader diplomatic engagement. In other words, they would take Lyra, her ship, and almost certainly the thermal blanket that had become so important to her and her people's hopes. It's complicated, he finished lamely. Lyra studied him for a long moment, then deliberately took his hand and placed it on the thermal blanket where it draped over her shoulder. The now familiar resonance hummed between them, but this time Elias sensed something new, a distant echo, as if the resonance was being reflected back from far away. With the echo came a feeling of anticipation, of attention focused toward them. "Your people are really out there, aren't they?" he whispered. "And they're coming too." Lyra nodded, her expression solemn. For the next 48 hours, Elias and Lyra worked frantically to improve their communication. The station's computer proved surprisingly helpful, its adaptive learning algorithms allowing Lyra to interface directly with the system once Elias modified a datapad to accommodate her unique touch patterns. Through a combination of images, simple animations, and the growing telepathic connection that strengthened each time Lyra shared thoughts with him, they built a rough but functional translation matrix. "Thar ancient," Lyra explained through the interface, the computer rendering her concepts in a simplified English. "Once all connected through resonance web. Great harmony across stars." "What happened to your people?" Elias asked, the question translated into visual patterns that Lyra could interpret. "The sundering," came the response, accompanied by images of a massive stellar event. What looked like a supernova, or perhaps several simultaneous solar flares across different star systems. "Natural disaster, not war. Destroyed resonance pathways. Scattered Kthar across void. Each holds fragment of greater whole. And you're trying to rebuild these resonance pathways? Yes. Need anchoring points. Places where unconditional kindness creates strong resonance patterns. Your gift." Here Lyra touched the thermal blanket, which was never far from her. "Unexpected, powerful. Created anchor points stronger than any found in generations. Because I gave you the blanket without expecting anything in return?" Elias asked, still struggling to understand why such a simple act held such significance. "Intention pure. No calculation. Saw only need," responded with kindness. "Such actions rare in cosmos. Create special resonance that Kthar can use to re-establish connections." As they talked, Elias shared more about himself, his childhood dreams of space exploration, the reality of academic politics and budget constraints that had led him to accept this isolated posting, his ambivalent relationship with the bureaucracy of Command. Lyra listened with what seemed like genuine interest, occasionally asking questions that revealed how alien her perspective truly was, but also showing surprising insight into his emotional states. In turn, she told him more about Kthar culture, their harmonious society built on empathic connection, their art forms based on resonance patterns, their historical journeys through the stars not in search of resources or conquest, but of new harmonies to incorporate into their collective consciousness. The more they communicated, the stronger their connection grew. Elias found himself able to sense Lyra's emotional states without her directly sharing them, and sometimes he would find concepts or images in his mind that he knew came from her. It wasn't telepathy exactly. He couldn't read her thoughts, but a kind of empathic resonance that reminded him of how close friends sometimes finish each other's sentences. "Other Kthar searching," Lyra explained during one session. "Scout ship detected anchor point signal. Coming to investigate. Hoping to find path to reunion." And they'll be here around the same time as the Xena Command team, Elias said grimly, checking the countdown timer he'd set up. Just over 24 hours remained. Lyra's 3 eyes blinked in sequence. A gesture Elias had learned indicated concern. Your people. Hostile. Not hostile exactly, Elias said carefully. Cautious. Protective. They don't know you or your intentions. They'll want to study you, understand what's happening, make sure you don't pose any threat. Study means separate from blanket? From anchor point? Elias nodded reluctantly. Most likely, yes. Standard containment protocol would involve isolating any non-terrestrial artifacts. Lyra's distress was palpable, resonating through their connection. Without anchor point, Thar cannot establish contact. Opportunity lost, perhaps forever. Elias sat heavily in his chair, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He was caught between his duty as a representative of Earth and Xena Command, and his growing understanding of what was at stake for Lyra and her people. There has to be a way, he said, more to himself than to Lyra. Some way to help them understand without triggering a security response. As if in answer to his words, a cascade of alarms suddenly blared throughout the station. Elias lunged for the control panel, heart racing as he took in readouts. The primary oxygen regeneration system was failing catastrophically, its chemical balances disrupted by what appeared to be a power surge. Backup systems were initiating, but they wouldn't be enough to maintain breathable air for more than a few hours. This doesn't make sense, Elias muttered, fingers flying over the controls as he tried to diagnose the problem. The system was functioning perfectly this morning. Lyra appeared beside him, the thermal blanket clutched tightly around her shoulders. She looked at the flashing warnings, then at Elias's frantic efforts, and seemed to come to a decision. Gently but firmly, she moved Elias aside, unfolded the thermal blanket, and laid it carefully over the main control panel. What are you doing? Elias asked, alarmed. We need to... But Lyra had already placed her hands on the blanket and begun emitting one of her resonant tones, this one more complex and layered than any Elias had heard before. The sound seemed to penetrate the very walls of the station, setting up harmonics that made Elias's teeth vibrate and his vision blur slightly. A soft glow began to emanate from beneath the blanket, spreading outward to encompass the entire control panel, then flowing along the station's conduits and power lines like luminescent liquid. The environmental alarms continued to blare, but the catastrophic failure indicators began to stabilize, moving from critical red to cautionary yellow. Then, with a final surge of resonance that Elias felt rather than heard, the systems reset. The alarms fell silent. The environmental readouts returned to normal parameters, then settled at levels of efficiency Elias had never seen before. Oxygen production at 110% of standard, carbon dioxide scrubbing at maximum effectiveness, even the humidity and temperature perfect for human comfort. Lyra removed the blanket, visibly tired but pleased, and turned to Elias with an expression that needed no translation. Now do you understand? That's impossible, Elias whispered, running system diagnostics that confirmed what his eyes were telling him. You just harmonized with the station's systems? Healed them somehow. Lyra placed her hand on his forehead, and the concept flowed directly into his mind. Asterisk, not healing. Reminding. All matter resonates. Your machines forget their purpose. The gift conductor helps them remember. Asterisk. Elias stared at the blanket, then at the perfectly functioning systems, then at Lyra. This is what you've been doing all along, he realized. The coffee machine, the air filters, the plants. You've been reminding them how to function optimally. Lyra nodded, her expression earnest as she tried to convey something important through their empathic link. A sense of urgency, of opportunity, of hope. And in that moment, Elias understood what she was suggesting. The approaching confrontation between Xena Command and the Cathar scout ship could go very badly, unless he could demonstrate, unequivocally, that Lyra and her people offered benefits that far outweighed any perceived risks. You're right, he said, determination replacing uncertainty. We need to prepare. The sensor alert came exactly when Elias expected it. The Xenocommand transport had entered lunar orbit and was establishing a synchronous position above Epsilon Station. Almost simultaneously, the long-range sensors detected the Cathar scout ship decloaking at a respectful distance. Its energy signature now, a clear, pulsing beacon that seemed to be responding directly to resonance patterns Lyra was generating through the thermal blanket. Elias took a deep breath, checking his appearance in a reflector panel. Standard uniform clean and properly fastened, hair combed back, expression composed and professional. Beside him, Lyra stood tall and dignified, the thermal blanket draped around her shoulders in a way that somehow resembled formal attire. "Ready?" he asked her. She touched his hand briefly, sending a wave of calm confidence through their connection, along with a simple concept: truth resonates. The communication panel chimed with an incoming transmission. Elias accepted it, and the stern face of Commander Diana Reyes appeared on screen, her dark eyes taking in both Elias and Lyra in one sharp glance. "Technician Vance," she said, voice clipped and formal. "You appear to have violated approximately 17 protocols regarding unidentified entities and unauthorized visitors. Explain yourself immediately." "Commander Reyes," Elias replied, keeping his tone respectful but firm. "I'm prepared to submit to any disciplinary action deemed appropriate. But first, I need to brief you on a situation of potential historical significance. May I proceed?" Commander Reyes's eyes narrowed, but she nodded once. "Proceed, but be aware that an extraction team is already preparing to board your station. Choose your words carefully." Over the next 15 minutes, Elias presented everything he and Lyra had documented over the past 72 hours. The dramatic improvements in station systems efficiency, the unexplainable growth in the hydroponics bay, the complete repair of equipment that had been malfunctioning for months. He carefully avoided mentioning the telekinetic communication or the deeper spiritual aspects of the Cathar culture, focusing instead on the practical, measurable benefits that Lyra's resonance technology had demonstrated. "Commander, I believe we are facing a first contact scenario with an advanced species that possesses technology far beyond our own," he concluded. "But, unlike scenarios we've theorized about, the Cathar appear to have no interest in our resources, our territory, or even our knowledge. They seek only to reconnect with their scattered people, using a form of energy manipulation that, as a beneficial side effect, can dramatically improve our existing technology." Commander Reyes had remained impassive throughout the presentation, but Elias could see the calculations happening behind her eyes. Xenocommand might be cautious, but they weren't stupid. The potential advantages of friendly contact with a technologically superior species were enormous. "And the alien vessel that decloaked 30 minutes ago?" she asked. "I assume that's related to your guest." "Yes, Commander. It's a Cathar scout ship that detected the resonance signature Lyra has been generating. They're hoping to establish contact with her, and through her, potentially with humanity." "I see." Commander Reyes studied Lyra for a long moment. "And what assurances can you offer that this isn't some elaborate deception? That your judgment hasn't been compromised by telepathic influence or other means?" It was a fair question, one Elias had anticipated. "Permission to demonstrate, Commander?" After a brief hesitation, Reyes nodded. "I've prepared a simple experiment," Elias said, bringing a sealed container into view of the camera. "This contains a water sample from our recycling system, deliberately contaminated with bacteria from my last biological survey mission. Normally, it would take our purification systems approximately 6 hours to render it potable again." He placed the container on a table where both Commander Reyes and Lyra could see it clearly. Lyra stepped forward, unfurled the thermal blanket, and gently draped it over the container. As she had done before, she placed her hands on the blanket and began to emit one of her resonant tones. The effect was immediate and visible even through the video feed. The cloudy water began to clear, particles separating and settling at an accelerated rate. Within minutes, the water was crystal clear. Elias ran it through the station's analyzer, displaying the results on screen. 100% pure, Commander. No bacterial contamination, mineral balance optimal for human consumption, oxygen saturation perfect. Commander Reyes's professional composure slipped for just a moment, her eyes widening slightly. Impressive technology, if genuine. Our team will verify these results when we arrive. Of course, Elias said. But Commander, before your team boards, I must inform you that the Cathar vessel is requesting permission to send a representative to join our discussion. They've made no aggressive movements and have maintained a respectful distance. I believe allowing this meeting would be a historic opportunity. Commander Reyes's expression hardened again. Absolutely not. Protocol for first contact scenarios is clear. With respect, Commander, Elias interrupted, knowing he was risking his career but unable to stop. This is no longer a first contact scenario. Contact has already been established. What we're discussing now is whether that contact will proceed in a spirit of mutual respect and potential cooperation, or suspicion and containment. He took a deep breath, then played his final card. The Cathar possess technology that allows them to travel between stars, Commander. If they meant us harm, they could have acted long before now. Instead, they've shown nothing but patience and restraint. Lyra has shared knowledge that could revolutionize our life support systems, extending the viability of every human outpost in the solar system. Imagine what more we might learn through peaceful exchange. A long silence followed as Commander Reyes appeared to consult with others off-screen. Finally, she returned her attention to the communication. Very well, Technician Vance. The Cathar representative may board Epsilon Station. My team will maintain position, but will be monitoring every aspect of this encounter. At the first sign of hostility or deception, we will intervene. Is that understood? Perfectly, Commander. Thank you. The communication ended, and Elias slumped against the wall, adrenaline draining from his system. Lyra approached him, concern evident in her three-eyed gaze. She placed a gentle hand on his arm, sending waves of gratitude and reassurance through their connection. That went better than expected, Elias admitted. Now we just have to hope your people are as diplomatic as you are. The Cathar shuttle arrived within the hour, a small craft that seemed to shimmer in and out of visibility as it approached the station's airlock. Elias and Lyra waited in the common area, the thermal blanket now arranged like a ceremonial cloth on the central table. When the inner airlock door finally opened, Elias found himself holding his breath. The figure that entered was clearly Cathar, with the same basic anatomy as Lyra, but physically larger and adorned with what appeared to be crystalline growths along its shoulders and forearms. Its three eyes, deeper blue than Lyra's, took in the station with a single sweeping glance before settling on Lyra herself. The reunion was immediate and profound. Lyra rushed forward, meeting the newcomer in what wasn't quite an embrace, but a touching of foreheads and hands that created a visible shimmer of energy between them. A harmonious sound filled the room, complex tones interweaving in patterns that made Elias's spine tingle. After a moment, they separated, and Lyra led the newcomer to Elias. Elias Vance, she said carefully in English, one of the few phrases she had mastered verbally. She gestured between them. Netherat, friend. Netherat studied Elias with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable, then slowly extended a four-fingered hand in what was clearly an attempt to mimic human greeting customs. Elias took it carefully and immediately felt the now familiar resonance pulse between them, though much weaker than his connection with Lyra. Welcome to Epsilon Station, Elias said, uncertain if Netherat would understand. To his surprise, the Cathar inclined its head in acknowledgement. Gratitude, Netherat said, the word clearly difficult to form with vocal structures not designed for human speech. For anchor gift, for protecting Lyra. Lyra guided them both to the table where the thermal blanket lay, and the three sat around it. What followed was one of the strangest diplomatic exchanges in human history, conducted through a mixture of simple spoken words, Lyra's telepathic image sharing, the station's computer translation attempts, and drawings made on data pads. Netherat, it turned out, was not just any Cathar, but a resonance pathfinder, something between a scientist, a spiritual leader, and an explorer. For decades by human reckoning, Netherat had been searching for exactly the kind of anchor point that Elias's simple act of kindness had created. The sundering scattered our people across many star systems, Netherat explained through the mixture of communication methods. Without the resonance network, we became isolated, diminished. What once was shared easily between all Cthar became difficult, then impossible. Knowledge lost, harmony broken. But you survived, Elias observed. You still have advanced technology, space travel. Some technology remained, Netherat acknowledged. But without the network, our civilization is fractured echo of former whole. Like you're humans with no language, no writing. Still intelligent, but unable to build, to grow, to share. The conversation continued for hours, delving into Cthar history, the physics of resonance technology, much of which went over Elias's head despite his scientific training, and the potential for human-Cthar cooperation. Throughout it all, the thermal blanket remained at the center of the table, occasionally touched by Lyra or Netherat with expressions of reverence. Eventually, the communication panel chimed again, Commander Reyes checking in. Elias brought her up to date on the discussion, careful to emphasize the potential benefits of cooperation while acknowledging the need for careful, controlled exchanges. The Cthar are proposing a limited cultural and technological exchange, he explained. A small delegation would remain in contact with Epsilon Station, helping us understand resonance technology while we help them establish communications with other Cthar vessels searching for anchor points. And what do they want in return? Commander Reyes asked, her tone suggesting she expected a significant catch. Nothing material, Elias said truthfully. They possess energy manipulation technology far beyond ours. They don't need our resources. What they value is the spirit behind certain actions. Acts of unconditional kindness, like the one that created this anchor point in the first place. You expect me to believe an advanced alien civilization traveled across space because someone was nice to them. The skepticism in Reyes's voice was palpable. Not exactly, Commander, Elias said carefully. It's more that acts of genuine kindness create energy patterns that the Cthar can use to rebuild their communication network. The stronger and more numerous these anchor points, the more of their scattered people they can reconnect with. An interesting theory, Reyes said, clearly not entirely convinced. My team will board Epsilon Station in 6 hours to begin verification procedures and formal diplomatic protocols. Until then, continue your discussions, but make no commitments on behalf of Xenocommand or Earth. Understood. Yes, Commander. After the communication ended, Netherat turned to Elias, 3 eyes blinking in that sequential pattern that indicated concern. Your leaders? Skeptical. Suspicious. Yes, Elias admitted. It's in our nature to be cautious about things we don't understand. He hesitated, then asked the question that had been bothering him. Honestly, why did you respond to this particular anchor point? Surely there must be acts of kindness happening all over Earth and other human outposts. Lyra and Netherat exchanged looks. Then Lyra reached out and touched Elias's forehead, sharing a complex series of images and impressions. He saw Earth from space, but overlaid with a strange energy pattern, mostly dark with small, scattered points of light that flickered uncertainly. Then the view shifted to Epsilon Station, where a single point of light glowed steadily, growing stronger with each passing day. Isolation, Netherat said as Lyra withdrew her hand, makes pure kindness rare, precious. No calculation, no social expectation, no witness to approve. Just giving. Here, on edge of nothing, your gift was purest we have found in many orbits. Because there was no one watching, Elias realized. No social pressure, no potential reward. Just kindness, Lyra finished for him, the words careful but clear. Sacred. The hours before Xenocommand's arrival passed quickly as the 3 continued their discussions, developing a framework for what a formal exchange might look like. Netherat explained that the Cthar had no interest in Earth itself. Their physiology was adapted to environments humans would find inhospitable, but were fascinated by human creativity and emotional complexity. Your species feels differently, Netherat tried to explain. Strong, chaotic, but vibrant. Resonance patterns unique in our experience. For their part, the Cthar offered knowledge of resonance technology that could dramatically improve human life support systems, energy efficiency, and potentially even medicine, all without requiring massive infrastructure changes, since the technology worked by optimizing existing systems rather than replacing them. As the estimated arrival time of the Xenocommand team approached, Elias found himself growing increasingly nervous. Despite the progress they'd made, he knew that official protocols would be rigid, suspicious, and potentially disruptive to the delicate understanding they developed. "I should warn you," he told Netherat, "the team is coming. They'll want to separate us, ask many questions, possibly restrict your movements. It's standard procedure, not hostility, but—" "We understand," Netherat interrupted gently. "All species protect themselves. Cthar will comply with reasonable measures." "What about the blanket?" Elias asked, looking at the thermal blanket that still lay at the center of their makeshift diplomatic table. "They may want to take it for analysis." Lyra tensed visibly, but Netherat made a calming gesture toward her. "Anchor point established now. Blanket important, sacred, but connection exists beyond physical object. Cannot be broken by separation alone." Despite this reassurance, when the sensors indicated the Xenocommand shuttle was on final approach, Lyra carefully folded the blanket and returned it to its place around her shoulders. The message was clear. She would cooperate, but this object was special to her. The Xenocommand team was efficient and professional. 6 specialists in environmental suits, led by a tall, severe-looking woman who introduced herself as Dr. Helen Matsuda, xenobiologist. They entered the station with an air of contained tension, weapons visibly holstered but within easy reach. "Technician Vance." Dr. Matsuda greeted him with a curt nod. "Commander Reyes has briefed me on your unorthodox actions. We'll discuss those later. For now, I need to establish baseline protocols for this encounter." What followed was a flurry of activity. Environmental testing, preliminary medical scans of both Cthar, performed at a respectful distance after Elias explained their cultural sensitivities, documentation of the station's systems and their allegedly improved performance, and a seemingly endless series of questions directed at all 3 of them. Throughout it all, Elias found himself in the unexpected role of mediator, translating not just language but perspectives, explaining human concerns to the Cthar and Cthar intentions to the increasingly fascinated Xenocommand team. Dr. Matsuda, initially cold and procedural, gradually showed signs of genuine scientific curiosity as the evidence of resonance technology's effects became impossible to dismiss. The water purification demonstration was repeated, observed under strict controls, and still produced the same remarkable results. "The implications are significant," she admitted during a brief consultation with Elias while the rest of her team continued their work. "If these effects can be reliably reproduced and scaled up, it could revolutionize our off-world colony sustainability." "That's what I've been trying to explain," Elias said, relief evident in his voice. "The Cthar aren't interested in conquest or resource extraction. They're looking for connection, with their own people primarily, but they're open to connection with humanity too. And this resonance network they're trying to rebuild, you're certain it poses no threat to human communication or neural function." The scientist in her was intrigued, but the security officer remained cautious. "From everything they've shared, it's a closed system that only works between Cthar," Elias explained. "Humans don't have the neural structures to participate directly. The most we might perceive is a sense of harmony, I suppose, when in proximity to active resonance points." Dr. Matsuda made notes on her datapad, then looked at Elias with unexpected seriousness. "You understand that regardless of how this proceeds, your career with Xenocommand is effectively over? Protocol violations of this magnitude can't be overlooked regardless of outcome." Elias had expected this, but hearing it stated so bluntly still stung. "I understand." I made my choice. May I ask why? There was genuine curiosity in her voice now, not just professional interrogation. You had a promising future. Your performance reviews were exemplary. Why risk everything for an unknown entity? Elias considered the question carefully, looking across the room where Lyra was demonstrating something to two fascinated Xenocommand scientists, the thermal blanket still draped around her shoulders. Because it was the right thing to do, he said finally. Because in that moment when I found her injured and alone, nothing else mattered except helping another being in need. And everything that's happened since, the technology, the potential alliance, all of it, those are just consequences of that simple choice. Dr. Matsuda studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. A career in scientific research might still be possible for you, Vance. Not with Xenocommand, but perhaps with one of the academic institutions involved in whatever exchange program develops from this. I could put in a word. Thank you, Elias said, surprised and touched by the unexpected offer. I'd appreciate that. The preliminary assessment lasted 18 hours, during which time the Cathar scout ship maintained its position at a respectful distance, observed but not approached by Xenocommand vessels. Finally, Dr. Matsuda called a briefing with all parties present. Based on our initial findings, I am recommending to Command that we proceed with a limited cultural and technological exchange as proposed by Technician Vance and the Cathar representatives, she announced formally. A secure facility will be established at a to-be-determined location, with appropriate protocols for both human and Cathar safety and comfort. She turned to Netherat and Lyra. We request that you remain at Epsilon Station for approximately 1 Earth month while these preparations are made. During this time, you would continue to work with our scientists to document and verify the effects of your resonance technology. Would this be acceptable? Netherat conferred briefly with Lyra, then inclined his head. Acceptable. Others of Cathar will come. Eventually, yes, assuming all continues to proceed peacefully, Dr. Matsuda confirmed. We would establish protocols for additional Cathar representatives to join the exchange program in phases. And the anchor point? Lyra asked, one hand touching the thermal blanket protectively. Dr. Matsuda had clearly been briefed on the significance of the blanket. It will remain with you, though we would appreciate the opportunity to study its properties with non-invasive methods, with your supervision and consent. The tension in Lyra's posture eased visibly. Acceptable. As the meeting concluded and the Xenocommand team prepared to depart with their preliminary findings, Elias found himself standing alone at one of Epsilon Station's small viewports, watching the shuttle undock. The past week had been the most extraordinary of his life, transforming what had been a monotonous assignment into a pivotal moment in human history. He sensed rather than heard Lyra approach, the subtle resonance that seemed to surround her now familiar and almost comforting. She joined him at the viewport, the thermal blanket, his former blanket, wrapped around her slender shoulders. Thank you, she said simply, her command of English still limited but improving rapidly. For what? Elias asked. For nearly getting myself court-martialed? For stumbling through first contact with all the grace of a drunk in low gravity. Lyra made the trilling sound he now recognized as Cathar laughter. For blanket, for kindness, for everything after. She reached out and took his hand, and through their touch Elias felt a complex wave of emotions. Gratitude, yes, but also affection, respect, and a deep sense of connection that transcended their biological differences. What happens now? He asked. Now, she said, we build bridges. Between your people and mine. Between scattered Cathar. All from one blanket, one moment of kindness. Elias looked out at the stars, suddenly seeing them not as cold, distant points of light in an empty void, but as potential connections in a vast, intricate web of life and intelligence. His simple act, giving a blanket to someone in need without expectation of return, had somehow become the first thread in what might become an interstellar tapestry. I still don't understand why it had to be me, he admitted. I'm not special. Anyone would have done the same. No, Lyra said with unexpected firmness. Not anyone. Many would calculate risk, advantage. Many would fear difference. You saw only need, gave freely. that is rare, precious. She touched the blanket reverently. Sacred. As Elias looked back at the alien woman with the standard issue thermal blanket draped around her shoulders like a royal mantle, he finally began to understand. Perhaps the universe didn't recognize human distinctions of important and unimportant, significant and insignificant. Perhaps, in the great cosmic scheme, the only actions that truly mattered were those undertaken with genuine compassion, without calculation of gain or loss. He had given an alien woman a blanket, and she had treated it like a sacred gift, and in doing so, had revealed that perhaps it was